As one would expect, the Chinese regions with more mercantile histories, most notably the Greater Shanghai and Greater Hong Kong regions, would suffer more. 2. China is now the world's largest importer of nearly everything. Iron, iron ore, aluminum, alumina, sulfur, copper, copper concentrate, nickel, plastics, wood, wood pulp, tin, glass, cotton, wool, soybeans, rubber, both natural and synthetic. This list goes on for a good long while. The most strategic of China's world's largest is, of course, oil. Think of the American oil neurosis of the past half-century, and that from a country that controls the global oceans, that imports most of the oil it needs from its co-North Americans. Now think of it from China's point of view. China's oil supply lines run past a lot of rivals. Oil shipped in from the Middle East or Africa must pass by India, Myanmar, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Russian oil may face a more direct route, but the Russians are kings of using energy dependency as strategic and political leverage. In a Bretton Woods world in which the Americans guarantee the sea lanes for everyone, this isn't a problem. In an Amerocentric world in which the Americans don't care, or perhaps don't care too much for China, this is a strategic disaster. Almost all of the countries along China's oil import route are also oil importers. All already have more than enough naval power necessary to interdict supertankers that go somewhere they don't wish them to. And China dare not risk tangling with even a mid-power navy out of range of its land-based aircraft because it lacks meaningful blue water capabilities. 3. Unfortunately for the Chinese, the Americans will be the least of their worries. Ultimately, the Americans will not be worried about China because it is a non-naval power and really not a significant threat to American power in a post-free trade world. At the top of the list of future Chinese concerns will be the Japanese. In a post-Bretton Woods world, the Japanese will face many similar constraints to the Chinese. They will need to guarantee access to their own oil supplies, raw materials, and foreign markets. But they will be different from China in two critical ways. First, on average, Japan's dependency on the outside world is less than half that of the Chinese in absolute terms. Second, unlike the Chinese, the Japanese actually have a blue water navy, the world's second most powerful, in fact, and so can go get what they need. One of the few things standing in the way of the Japanese will be anything sailing up and down the Chinese coast. 4. Even if China did have a blue water navy, it could not use it freely. Bisecting the Chinese coastline is, of course, Taiwan. The biggest challenge Taiwan presents to the mainland is not its ability to make a mockery of the concept of a united China simply by existence, but rather the fact that it is far cheaper to use a land-based military to threaten sea lanes than a sea-based military. Taiwanese cruise missiles and aircraft can deny Chinese shipping and even military vessels access to a wide swath of territory. And Taiwan isn't alone. Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Singapore form a line of islands off the Chinese coast that block any possible Chinese access to the ocean blue. All of these countries are broadly hostile to China. All of them have air forces and cruise missile assets that can threaten and in many cases destroy Chinese maritime assets that get too close. And it is likely that most, if not all of them, will remain allied with the United States in the future. China is the country that has benefited the most from the American Cold War strategy of market access and defanging the various maritime powers, and therefore has the most to lose. In the imminent future, the Chinese face three crushing challenges. First, Japan is likely to start acting less like an NGO and more like the Japan of ages past. Second, China's geography is nearly as riven as Europe's, with the great myth of Chinese history that unity is normal soon to give way to a more complex and messier reality. Third, everything that made the Chinese economy a success, everything that has put cars on the road, roads on the map, money into citizens' pockets, and food in their mouths, is completely dependent upon an international economic and strategic environment wholly maintained by a country that doesn't like China all that much. China has been sliding toward disaster for some time. Two events a decade ago first revealed cracks in the Chinese juggernaut. In the first, villagers of the town of Huaxi, south of Shanghai, protesting local factory-sourced pollution, overturned the buses that had brought in security personnel to quell them, in essence barricading out central authorities with their own equipment. In the second, citizens of Dongzhou, near Hong Kong, protesting the building of a power plant, found themselves under fire by security personnel, resulting in at least 20 deaths. It was the first significant use of deadly force against Chinese citizens by their own government since Tiananmen Square. Since then, public unrest has become nearly omnipresent, ranging from ethnic-themed clashes in places like Xinjiang and Tibet, to worker disputes like the Foxconn suicides in 2010, to protests against the nearly 17 million acres of farmland that have been expropriated by various local governments. By 2011, the government was recording 100,000 such mass events annually. The stage is most certainly already set, but how China's transition plays out will depend almost entirely upon the nature and timing of Bretton Woods' end. Considering the unpredictability of American actions, that is something I cannot forecast. A slow-motion American retreat could leave the Chinese starving for raw materials, which would trigger not just poverty in the coastal regions of Shanghai and to its south, but also a contest with Japan and Taiwan that the Americans might or might not participate in. A break in the Chinese financial system would cause a national collapse in development and mass uprisings in the interior. An American panic attack could trigger an overnight revolution across the length and breadth of China as everything from markets to jobs to the power supply cuts out all at once. And that assumes that the target of America's panic attack isn't China itself. There are so many things that could trigger China's fall that mapping out the route of descent is a task best completed once freefall is already in progress. Sketching out China's future after that transition, however, is actually fairly straightforward. China's ability to employ its population will end. China's ability to source the materials to modernize will end. The impacts will vary by region. As poor as the interior is already, it is the region that will actually see the sharpest contractions in standard of living. While the coastal regions, north, center, and south, can participate in export markets by dint of geography, the interior cannot. As such, the interior is completely